My daughter was crying on the phone at 11 o'clock at night, and my first thought wasn't sympathy. It was, here we go. Not because I'm a cold man. I spent 34 years being anything but cold. I poured concrete in January with cracked hands. I worked double shifts, 3 weeks straight when her mother wanted to remodel the kitchen. I coached her softball team for 6 years, even though my back was already shot at 42. Cold was never the word anyone used for me. But when she called that night, sobbing about how her husband had emptied their joint account and taken a flight to Phoenix without telling her, and when she said, between those gasping, hiccuping breaths, "Daddy, I need you," I felt something I'm not proud of. I felt tired, the kind of tired that lives in your chest, not your body. Because the last time she'd really needed me, she'd told me I was the problem. Let me back up. Because this story doesn't start with a phone call. It starts 30-some years ago in a 2-bedroom apartment in Rockford, Illinois, with a woman named Sandra who had green eyes and a laugh that could fill a whole room. I was 26. She was 24. I was a structural iron worker, starting at the bottom of a union crew, making decent money but not impressive money. Sandra taught 2nd grade. We weren't rich, we were fine, and for a long time fine was everything. We had our daughter, Nora, in 1989. 3 years later, our son came along. For about a decade, life was genuinely good. Sandra and I weren't dramatic people. We didn't fight loudly. We built things quietly. A house in Machesney Park, savings, a life. The trouble was, Sandra stopped seeing the life we built. Somewhere in her early 40s, she started seeing only what was missing. I don't say that to be cruel. I've had a long time to think about this. What was missing, to her mind, was a certain kind of man. Not necessarily a better man, just a different kind. The kind who wore sport coats to dinner without being asked. The kind who talked about wine. The kind who made you feel like you were going somewhere, even if you weren't. I was the kind who came home with calluses and a paycheck and a dumb joke to make the kids laugh at dinner. For a long time, that was enough. Then it wasn't. She met him through a neighborhood association meeting. His name was Gordon. He flipped commercial real estate, or said he did. He drove a Lexus he'd leased and wore a watch that he made sure you noticed. He was 51 and divorced, and had that easy, moneyed confidence that I could never manufacture because I'd spent my whole life doing actual work. I knew something was wrong before she told me. Wives who are thinking about leaving start doing a specific kind of math around the house. They start measuring. What am I owed? What have I given? What could I have had instead? She told me on a Sunday in March 2019. She sat me down at the kitchen table like she was about to discuss refinancing. And she said she'd been unhappy for a long time, and she needed something different. She didn't say Gordon's name that day. She didn't have to. My son was at college in Madison by then. Nora was 29, married, living in Naperville. I called her that evening, still sitting at that kitchen table after Sandra had gone to stay at her sister's. Nora picked up. I told her what happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said carefully, like she'd been thinking about it for longer than one phone call, "Dad, honestly, I think Mum's been trying to tell you for years. I didn't say anything back. I wasn't sure what there was to say. The divorce took 8 months. Sandra wanted the house. I'd built half of it with my own hands. Not metaphorically. I'd laid the deckboards myself. I'd finished the basement over 2 winters, but her lawyer was sharp, and I was tired of fighting. And in the end I signed the papers and took my tools and my truck and my retirement savings, which was substantial because I'd been careful about money my entire adult life. I moved into a rental in Loves Park, a nothing apartment, clean but small. The kind of place that echoed. For about 6 months I went through the motions. Work, grocery store, television. I'm not going to pretend I handled it gracefully. I drank too much scotch for a while. I called my son too late at night sometimes. He was patient with me. He was always more like me than Nora was. Nora, meanwhile, had developed a friendship with Gordon. That was the word she used when she mentioned it. Friendship. He came to her daughter's birthday party. She thought he was charming. She said once that she could see why her mother was happy. I thanked her for telling me and got off the phone as fast as I could. In the spring of 2020, during the first months of COVID, I did something no one expected from a 61-year-old ironworker from northern Illinois. I applied for a contractor position with a construction firm doing infrastructure work in Montana. Big sky country. Remote. Cold in ways that made Illinois look like Florida. I got the job. I packed what fit in my truck. I drove northwest for 2 days, and when I crossed into Montana and saw those mountains come up on the horizon for the first time, something in my chest loosened, not healed, just loosened. I want to be clear, I wasn't running away. I was following the only logic that had ever made sense to me. You go where the work is. You build something. You keep your hands moving. I settled in a small town outside Bozeman. I'm not going to tell you it was easy. I didn't know a soul. The winters were something else entirely. But the work was real, and the people were real, and nobody cared what kind of car I drove or how I held a wine glass. I met a woman named Ruth at a hardware store, of all places. She was 64, widowed, retired from nursing, and she was standing in the fastener aisle, trying to figure out which lag bolt she needed for a deck repair she was doing herself. I helped her pick the right ones. We talked for 40 minutes. She bought me coffee across the street. That was 2.5 years ago. I'm not going to make it into more than it is. We're two older people who like each other's company and have both had enough of pretending life is simpler than it is. She makes good soup. She doesn't ask me to be anyone I'm not. At my age, that covers most of the requirements. Sandra and Gordon got married in the fall of 2021. Nora went to the wedding. She said it was beautiful. She said Gordon gave a toast that made everyone cry. She texted me a photo of herself and her mother, both of them dressed up and beaming. I was somewhere outside Livingston, sitting in my truck eating a sandwich, when that text came through. I looked at the photo for a long time. Then I put my phone in the cuff holder and finished my lunch. What Nora didn't know, and what Sandra was apparently also learning around this time, was that Gordon's real estate business was built on air. I found out in pieces, the way you always do with these things. My son called me first. He'd seen something on LinkedIn, some former business partner of Gordon's posting critically about a failed deal. Then a mutual acquaintance from the old neighborhood sent me a news article, a Rockford Business Journal piece, the kind nobody reads until they do. It said that a local real estate developer was under investigation for misrepresenting project valuations to a group of private investors. It named the company. Gordon's company. I read it twice. I set my phone down. I went back to work. Over the next several months, I tracked what was happening the way I'd always tracked anything important. Quietly, without advertising it. Gordon's deals had been collapsing since 2020, apparently. He'd been covering losses by pulling money from newer investors to pay older ones. Classic pattern. Not a new trick. The Lexus and the watch and the sport coats were all leverage. He was, in the technical sense of the word, broke. Had been for some time. Sandra didn't know, or she knew something was wrong. But not the shape of it. She'd quit her teaching job when they got married. She'd let him manage everything. That was the part that made me feel something I didn't want to feel. Not satisfaction, but a kind of sad recognition. I knew Sandra. I knew how she thought. She'd handed the wheel to someone who looked like he knew where he was going, because I'd never looked like that. And she'd confused looking the part with being the part. Gordon's investors started filing complaints with the Illinois Attorney General's office in early 2022. By spring, there was a formal investigation. By summer, his assets were frozen. Their accounts were frozen. The Lexus got repossessed from the driveway of my old house, the house I'd built the deck on, the house where my kids grew up, while Sandra watched from the front window. I know this because Nora told me. She came back into my life that summer like I'd never gone anywhere. Calling, texting, long messages about how she was worried about her mother, about how everything had fallen apart, about how Gordon was claiming it was all a misunderstanding, and the lawyers were saying otherwise. I listened. I didn't say much. I asked how her kids were doing. I asked if Sandra was safe. meaning physically, and Nora said yes, she was safe, just scared. I said, okay, good. Nora paused. Then she said, are you going to come back? I thought about that for a moment. About what come back even meant at this point. Come back to Illinois? Come back to help Sandra? Come back to be the steady, reliable, uncomplicated man who was always there when things went sideways? The man who had never been exciting enough, never dynamic enough, never sufficiently impressive, until suddenly impressive didn't pay the electric bill. I said, I'm not sure what you're asking me to come back to, sweetheart. She didn't have a good answer for that. Sandra called me herself in August of 2022. First time we'd spoken directly since the divorce was finalized. Her voice was different. Smaller, somehow. She asked how I was doing. I said fine. There was a pause long enough to drive a truck through. She said she'd made some mistakes. She said Gordon wasn't who she thought he was. She said she didn't know what she was going to do about the house. There were liens. The lawyers were sorting it out. It was complicated. She said she was scared. I said I was sorry she was going through that. I meant it. Whatever I felt about how things had gone. Watching someone you spent 27 years with go through that kind of humiliation and fear. I'm not wired to enjoy that. I'm not built that way. But then she said something that stopped me cold. She said, you always knew how to take care of things. I don't have anyone to help me figure this out. And I understood then exactly what she was hoping this phone call was. She wasn't calling to apologize. Not really. She was calling because I was useful. I had been useful for 27 years, and the muscle memory of it had finally kicked in. I said, Sandra, I hope things get clearer for you. I genuinely do. But I'm not the person to help you with this anymore. She was quiet. Then she said, I understand. I don't know if she did. The legal process took another year and a half. Gordon eventually pled guilty to securities fraud, 2 counts. He was sentenced to 4 years, though his lawyer was apparently good enough to keep him out of federal prison. He went to a minimum security facility downstate. The house, my house, was sold by the court to satisfy the liens. Sandra got almost nothing out of it after everything was settled. She's renting now, I'm told, a condo in Rockford. My son says she's okay, quieter than she used to be. Nora and I repaired things slowly. It wasn't a dramatic conversation. It was more like, over the course of a year, she started calling more regularly, asking about Montana, asking about Ruth once she found out about Ruth, asking about the work. She brought her family out to visit last September. Her husband is a decent guy, always has been. Her kids are good kids. Her oldest, my granddaughter, followed me around a job site for an entire afternoon asking questions about why bridges don't fall down. And I thought, this one's going to be something. Nora never said I was wrong about you in so many words. That's not how she is. But she said, standing in my kitchen while Ruth was making coffee, looking out at the mountains through the window, I didn't understand what you built, Dad. I think I do now. That was enough. More than enough. My son had never really stopped calling, so there was nothing to repair there. He drove out to see me the first Christmas after I moved. Slept on my couch for a week. We watched football and drove around and didn't talk about his mother more than once. He's a good man. I did some things right. There's a detail I haven't mentioned yet. When I left Rockford in 2020, I didn't just pack my truck and drive. In the 6 months I'd spent in that echo chamber apartment, I'd also done something very deliberate with my money. I had 31 years of union pension. I had significant savings. I had a 401k that I'd been contributing to since 1991. My financial situation, on paper, was genuinely solid. Sandra's lawyer hadn't gotten to any of it because I'd been careful and the divorce settlement had been final before I made certain moves. Before I left Illinois, I sat down with a financial advisor in Rockford named Phil, a man I'd known for 20 years, and I restructured everything, moved things around legally, intelligently, the way a man who's spent his whole life being careful about money can do when he finally has the time to pay full attention. I'm not going to get into the specifics. The point is, I was not a man in financial trouble. I was a man who looked like he might be because he drove an old truck and wore work boots and didn't talk about it. Gordon had found out about my pension at some point. Through Sandra, I assumed, and apparently made some comment at a dinner party about it. Nora told me this later, embarrassed. He'd called it a modest union payout. He'd implied I was going to be struggling in retirement. He'd said this in front of my daughter. When Nora told me this, she watched my face carefully for a reaction. I just laughed. Genuinely. Because there's a particular kind of man who needs you to be smaller than him to feel big enough himself. And Gordon had been that man every single day, and he'd spent years building an empire of borrowed money and fraudulent paperwork to prove it. And in the end, the only thing modest was his 4-year sentence and the 8 square feet of floor space they gave him in minimum security. But I didn't say any of that. I just laughed, and Ruth refilled my coffee. And outside the window, the mountains were doing what they always do, just standing there, unconcerned, enormous, not proving anything to anyone. I'm 63 now. I work 3 days a week because I want to, not because I have to. Ruth and I drove up to Glacier National Park last summer and hiked more than either of us probably should have, at our age, and didn't care. I talk to my son every Sunday. I talk to Nora every couple of weeks. She sends me pictures of my grandkids. I have them framed on the wall. Sandra's doing okay by all accounts. I don't harbor anything against her. The bitterness I felt in those first years after the divorce, it burned off slowly, like fog. What's left isn't warmth exactly, but it's not cold either. It's just distance. The healthy kind. I think about something my father told me once when I was about 30 and complaining about some foreman who'd taken credit for my work on a job. My father was a pipe fitter. He worked hard every day of his life. He said, "Son, a man who needs to be seen is a man who's not sure what he's worth. You just keep working. The structure stands or it doesn't. Doesn't matter who watched you build it." I've thought about that a lot these past few years. About Gordon up there on his Lexus and his watch, needing to be seen. About me, driving northwest in a truck nobody would look twice at, toward mountains that don't care what your balance sheet says. The structure stands or it doesn't. Mine's still standing. And when Nora called that night, crying about her husband and the empty account, which turned out to be a financial argument that resolved itself in 3 days, nowhere near as dramatic as it seemed, at 11 p.m., I drove down to Naperville and fixed her back fence that had been leaning since spring, played board games with my grandkids for 2 evenings straight, and drove home on a Sunday with the windows down and the radio on the station playing old country music and the kind of quiet satisfaction in my chest that I spent 30 years not knowing was even possible. That's the whole story. Or most of it. The rest is just Tuesday mornings and coffee and Ruth telling me I'm using the wrong weight of oil for the truck and the mountains outside the window, the same as always, not proving anything to anyone.